Hi there, my name's Glenn Shanahan, and this is my mutual fund analysis. I start out by looking at the U.S. mutual funds. Um, in general, most of them have been seeing pretty good growth. I decided to look at the growth of 10,000 over 5 years. I felt like 10 years was too far out, and 3 years and 1 year was kind of too close, so I just chose the middle point to do my analysis at. Um, Most of the stocks did not have loads, and even the ones with loads, a lot of them didn't perform quite as well. So I looked at the growth of 10,000 over 5 years, and then I calculated in the load and the expenses to bring up an adjusted one. And then I also looked at things as like assets and top five holdings and turnover. I was kind of wanting, when picking my favorite out of the group, avoiding like this Fidelity fund with 30% in top five holdings. I was just looking for something more diversified. And then turnover. Um, so the green fund was the Vanguard fund, which I liked the most, and actually had high turnover. I was thinking that I wouldn't like funds with high turnover, but with the low load and low expense with the Vanguard fund and the return being as high as it was, I really didn't mind it. Um, the close one was the AASCX fund right here. It had higher returns even when adjusted for its load and expense. Um, But in general, I just like the idea of not having to pay the load and the expense, even though this fund was slightly outperforming. And the other thing which made me choose the Vanguard fund over it was the assets in the top five holdings, because it was the 5% versus the almost 20%. So this fund didn't have a load and had low expense, and it was a lot more diversified, even though it had high turnover. My least favorite was the American funds. I actually chose to include this fund because I actually have some money in it, and it's by far underperforming compared to the other funds I looked up. When looking at the international funds, they were called emerging market funds. I thought the returns on these were going to be a lot higher. I was kind of disappointed when looking at them. The interesting thing about all these funds is they pretty much held a lot of the same stocks, especially in the top. And they're also, for the assets in top five holdings, most of them were 20% or above. And the stocks that they like pretty much all held were Tencent, Alibaba, and Samsung. So I wasn't really a fan for the international funds compared to the U.S. funds. The growth was just not great, and they just weren't very diversified. And a couple of the funds had crazy high turnover with 176% and 137%. But again, my favorite was the American Century. It had low expenses and fees, and out of all of them, it had the best growth. Um, the least favorite was the Dry House. It had very poor growth while having a insane turnover rate. Lastly, we looked at sector funds, and my favorite was the Vanguard Information Tech. It had really high returns, and it held like a lot of the popular tech stocks. The only disappointing thing was when looking at it, you need $100,000 investment to enter it, which is a lot of money to enter it. Um, and my least favorite was the Fidelity Select Energy. When choosing the sector funds, I kind of did like a different sector for each fund, which maybe wasn't the best for comparing sector funds, but in general, energy just seems like a really weak industry to invest in. And my favorite overall, since I chose a Vanguard fund for my first one and my last one, is kind of Vanguard funds in general. All of them have low fees and they all have high returns. The only downside is its higher initial investments. Many are accessible, but like it says here, the $2,000 to $5,000 ranges. The only downside was their best performers are really high initial investments. Thank you for listening to my presentation.